The Nexus Prime space station hung like a crystalline spiderweb against the infinite darkness of space, its millions of interconnected modules refracting starlight in a dazzling display of technological prowess. Inside the Grand Diplomatic Rotunda, the most powerful beings in the known galaxy congregated, each species a testament to evolutionary complexity, each representative a living weapon of political intrigue. At the center of it all, Queen Xerox of the Celestial Dominion commanded attention with a biological presence that defied human comprehension. Her body was a living masterpiece of genetic engineering, a humanoid form that shifted between solid and quasi-liquid states, iridescent scales rippling with every movement. Sensory tendrils extended from her skull, each one a sophisticated communication and threat assessment organ that could read biochemical responses with terrifying precision. When she moved, gravity itself seemed to bow. The human diplomatic representative stood in stark contrast. Michael Chen wore the most unremarkable gray suit possible, a deliberate choice that made him blend into the background like architectural filler. His appearance was studiedly average. Medium height, forgettable facial features, hands clasped behind his back, with a stillness that suggested either complete calm or total insignificance. The Galactic Conclave was in session, and today's agenda promised a routine evaluation of humanity's potential for interstellar recognition. Routine, that is, until Queen Xerox took the central podium. Her voice emerged not as sound, but as a multilayered communication that simultaneously translated across species, a biological communication technology so advanced it could convey emotional subtext, cultural nuance, and raw contempt in a single transmission. Representatives of the Galactic Conclave, she began, her form slightly translucent, revealing intricate biological circuitry beneath her skin, we gather to consider the petition of the human species for advanced diplomatic recognition. A ripple of anticipation moved through the assembled delegates. Some species leaned forward on appendages, others adjusted sensory clusters, all waiting for the inevitable judgment. After extensive analysis, Xerox continued, the Celestial Dominion finds the human species amusing at best, primitive at worst. Her sensory tendrils focused on Michael Chen, who remained perfectly still. No muscle twitched, no expression changed. Humanity represents a curious anomaly, she proclaimed, her voice a symphony of dismissal. A species that has barely escaped its planetary cradle, that still resolves conflicts through physical violence, that lacks even basic telepathic communication abilities. Your technological achievements are rudimentary. Your social structures are fractured. Your understanding of quantum mechanics is infantile. Each word was a surgical strike, designed to humiliate not just Chen, but the entire human race watching through diplomatic channels. You are children playing with stones while we navigate the fabric of reality itself, Xerox declared. Her form expanded, filling the chamber with an oppressive presence. Your application for advanced diplomatic status is denied. Humanity will remain in quarantine, observed but not engaged. Chen remained motionless. A small pencil, utterly analog, seemingly insignificant, sat in his breast pocket. His eyes, when they met the Queen's, held something she did not expect. Not anger, not fear. Something else entirely. A slight, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth, the kind of smile that suggested this was precisely what he wanted to happen. The assembled delegates missed it. Queen Xerox's sensory tendrils, for all their sophistication, failed to read the true meaning behind that smile. The diplomatic session was over. Humanity had been dismissed. The game, however, was just beginning. 5 years earlier, in a nondescript office of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, Michael Chen had been nothing more than a statistical anomaly. His personnel file was a masterpiece of administrative camouflage, so perfectly average that it seemed to blur into the background of countless other mid-level bureaucratic records. But averageness was his greatest weapon. The file told a story of deliberate mediocrity. Graduated from a mid-tier university with unremarkable grades, worked in low-level administrative positions. No outstanding achievements, no notable commendations. The kind of employee administrators would overlook, managers would forget, and colleagues would struggle to remember. What the file didn't capture was the intricate web of information Michael had been weaving for years. It began during his university days, not through academic excellence, but through an uncanny ability to observe. While others focused on grades, Michael studied systems. He understood that true power resided not in individual brilliance, but in the invisible connections that held complex networks together. His first significant test came during a seemingly mundane UN peacekeeping mission in a fractured African region. What appeared to be a routine diplomatic assignment became a masterclass in invisible manipulation. The conflict involved 3 rival ethnic groups, 2 international corporate interests, and a labyrinthine set of historical grievances. Traditional diplomatic approaches had failed for decades. Michael didn't negotiate. He listened. For weeks, he collected seemingly irrelevant pieces of information. A family connection here, an old business debt there, economic pressures, personal rivalries. Where others saw chaos, Michael saw a complex equation waiting to be solved. In a single, meticulously orchestrated week, he realigned the entire regional dynamic, not through force, not through dramatic speeches, but through a series of whispered conversations, carefully placed documents, and strategic introductions that made each faction believe they were achieving their own goals. The peace lasted. The UN never fully understood how. Michael's superiors noticed. Subtly. He wasn't promoted. He wasn't celebrated. But certain doors began to open. Certain assignments became increasingly complex. The pencil in his pocket, now a constant companion, was a relic from that first mission. An old-fashioned wooden implement that had been with him during that transformation. To most, it was just a writing tool. To Michael, it was a symbol of analog precision in a digital world. His recruitment into the Advanced Xenological Interaction Unit was so quiet that it appeared to be another bureaucratic shuffle. Most believed it was a clerical error when he was assigned to extraterrestrial diplomatic preparation. But the Celestial Dominion's intelligence services had been watching. Their initial reports were dismissive. Subject demonstrates no extraordinary capabilities, one alien analyst noted. Statistically insignificant. Recommendation. Continued passive observation. They missed everything. Michael Chen understood something fundamental about intelligence that most species overlooked. Information was not about volume. It was about connection. About seeing patterns where others saw noise. The pencil in his pocket felt warm, almost alive. As the diplomatic recordings of the Nexus Prime session were transmitted across galactic networks, Michael allowed himself the slightest hint of a smile. The humiliation was precisely calculated. The game was moving exactly as planned. The pencil had a history far more complex than its simple wooden exterior suggested. It belonged to Elizabeth Chen, Michael's grandmother, a cryptographer who had worked during the most critical periods of the early 21st century global conflicts. Not a soldier, not a politician, but a woman who understood that true power resided in information, in the spaces between words, in the subtle art of decoding what others believed was incomprehensible. During the great digital encryption wars of 2043, when quantum computing threatened to unravel every existing security protocol, Elizabeth discovered something remarkable. While governments and tech giants raced to create unbreakable digital codes, she returned to something analog, something human, graphite and wood. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected intersection of disciplines: linguistics, mathematics, psychological profiling, and an almost mystical understanding of human communication. She realized that true encryption wasn't about complex algorithms, but about understanding the human mind's capacity for pattern recognition. The pencil in Michael's pocket was her primary tool, a Blackwing 602, a legendary writing instrument favored by artists, writers, and deep thinkers. But in Elizabeth's hands, it became something more: a decoder, a strategic instrument. She developed a communication system so subtle that it existed in the microscopic variations of handwriting, pressure points, minute graphite variations, angles of inscription that carried meaning beyond the visible text, a language that existed in the quantum uncertainty between what was written and what was implied. The alien intelligence services, with all their advanced scanning technologies, would never comprehend such an approach. It was too fundamentally human, too analog, too nuanced. When Elizabeth died, she left the pencil to Michael, not with dramatic ceremony, but with a simple note. Information is a living thing. Learn to listen to its breath. Michael understood immediately. This was not just a writing tool. It was a key, a map, a weapon. During his diplomatic training, he began to study his grandmother's forgotten research: quantum linguistics, psychological cartography, the science of invisible communication. While his peers focused on digital protocols and universal translators, Michael delved into something far more profound. How do intelligent systems actually communicate? Not through direct language, but through the spaces between understanding. The Celestial Dominion's intelligence reports continued to miss everything. They saw a mid-level bureaucrat. Michael saw a conduit for a communication revolution. The pencil in his pocket was more than a memory. It was a manifesto, a declaration that human intelligence operated on principles far beyond linear comprehension. At the Nexus Prime Station, as Queen Zirax completed her public humiliation, Michael's fingers brushed against the pencil. Each microscopic interaction was a calculation, each moment a potential communication channel that no alien technology could decode. The pencil had waited. Generations had prepared for this moment. And now, the real conversation was about to begin. 27 standard galactic days after the Nexus Prime incident, the real game began. The Celestial Dominion believed they had conclusively dismissed humanity. Instead, they had unknowingly triggered a cascade of events that would redefine interstellar diplomacy. Michael Chen arrived on the diplomatic station orbiting the contested Epsilon horizon, a region so strategically complex that 12 different species had competing claims. The station itself was a marvel of modular design, with communication zones that shifted like living organisms, diplomatic chambers that could reconfigure based on psychological readings of their occupants. Queen Zirax's intelligence network had been watching. They expected nothing, which made everything possible. The conflict centered on mineral rights to a series of quantum-rich asteroids. Traditional diplomatic approaches had failed for decades. Centuries of negotiation had produced nothing but increasingly complex layers of bureaucratic obstruction. Michael carried nothing but a data pad and the pencil. The first indication that something was different came during the preliminary briefing. Representatives from 6 different species sat around a holographic table that constantly shifted its dimensional properties. Negotiation protocols were so complex that most diplomats required neural link translators just to understand the basic communication parameters. Michael used no such technology. He began by drawing, not typing, not projecting, simply drawing with the pencil on a standard diplomatic document. Seemingly random lines, pressure variations that would be invisible to most scanning technologies. The Zorlak representative, a crystalline being that communicated through quantum entanglement, was the first to notice something unusual. Its translucent body began to vibrate at a frequency that suggested profound confusion. There is an information pattern, the Zorlak communicated, its voice a series of harmonic resonances. But that is impossible. Michael continued drawing. Each line was a mathematical representation of the complex economic interdependencies between the species competing for the asteroid rights. But it wasn't just a diagram. It was a living communication protocol that rewrote the very language of negotiation. The station's advanced AI systems began to malfunction, not through any direct technological intervention, but through a communication strategy so alien to their programming that they couldn't process the input. Queen Zirax's remote observers watched in mounting confusion. Their most advanced translation matrices were being rendered obsolete by a human using a wooden pencil and a standard diplomatic document. "This is not possible," one of her chief analysts reported. "The human is not using any recognized communication protocol. Yet the other representatives are responding." Responding was an understatement. The Zorlak representative had begun to resonate in a pattern that suggested agreement. The Silicon Collective's representative, typically as rigid as its computational core, showed signs of quantum flexibility. Michael never raised his voice, never made a traditional argument. He simply drew. And with each line, he was rewriting the fundamental rules of interstellar negotiation. The pencil moved. The station watched. The universe held its breath. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to get interesting. The final diplomatic session was scheduled in the quantum resonance chamber, a space so advanced it could simultaneously exist in multiple dimensional states. Only the most sophisticated species were typically allowed entry. Humanity was not considered one of them. Yet here was Michael Chen, standing at the center of a room that defied conventional physics. The chamber's walls were living membranes of quantum-entangled matter, capable of translating thought into geometric patterns of unimaginable complexity. Queen Zarax materialized, quite literally, as a holographic projection and a physical presence simultaneously. Her form rippled with potential energy, each molecular configuration a weapon of psychological warfare. "You are an anomaly," she communicated, her voice a multidimensional wave that would have shattered the mental barriers of most species. "Your presence here is a statistical improbability." Michael said nothing. The pencil in his hand began to move. What happened next defied every known principle of interstellar communication. The pencil was not just writing. It was translating, not between languages, but between fundamental modes of understanding. Each graphite line became a bridge between conceptual universes, a translation that went beyond words, beyond mathematics, beyond the very concept of communication itself. The quantum resonance chamber began to respond. Geometric patterns erupted from the walls, not as projections, but as living mathematical expressions. Complex negotiation protocols that had remained deadlocked for centuries suddenly found resolution in the spaces between Michael's pencil strokes. The Silicon Collective's representatives, beings of pure computational logic, began to vibrate at a frequency that suggested something close to emotional resonance. The Zorlak crystalline diplomats found their quantum entanglement patterns aligning in ways that suggested unprecedented cooperation. Queen Zarax's sophisticated sensory tendrils could not comprehend what was happening. This was not negotiation. This was not diplomacy. This was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent systems could communicate. Michael was doing something impossible. He was finding common ground in the quantum uncertainty between different modes of understanding. Each pencil stroke was a diplomatic algorithm that rewrote the very rules of interaction. The chamber's dimensional boundaries began to fluctuate. Negotiation zones that had been immovable for centuries suddenly became fluid. Economic barriers dissolved. Territorial disputes found resolution in mathematical poetry. And Michael Chen remained perfectly still. The pencil moved. The universe listened. Queen Zarax felt something she had never experienced before. Not defeat, not submission, but a fundamental understanding that her entire conception of intelligence had been catastrophically limited. "What are you?" she communicated, her multidimensional form showing the first genuine signs of vulnerability. Michael looked up. For the first time, a smile touched his lips, not of triumph, but of profound understanding. The pencil stopped moving. The diplomatic landscape of the known universe had just been rewritten, and nobody would ever understand exactly how it happened. In the aftermath of the quantum resonance chamber incident, Queen Zarax experienced something no ruler of the celestial dominion had ever encountered: complete existential recalibration. Her personal sanctum, a bioengineered space that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensional states, became a prison of self-reflection. The walls pulsed with memory fragments, each one a challenge to everything she understood about intelligence, communication, and power. The human diplomat, Michael Chen, had done more than win a negotiation. He had fundamentally dismantled the philosophical foundations of her entire civilization. Celestial Dominion intelligence archives began to unravel. Every previous assessment of humanity collapsed under the weight of what had transpired. Their most sophisticated analysis algorithms ground to a halt, unable to process the fundamental paradigm shift. Xerax underwent what her species called a cognitive disintegration, a rare psychological state where fundamental belief structures completely collapse. Her sensory tendrils, once instruments of absolute control, now vibrated with profound uncertainty. She began to replay the moment of transformation repeatedly. The pencil. So simple, so analog, a technology her civilization had discarded millennia ago as primitive. Yet in Michael Chen's hand, it became something transcendent. The personal logs she transmitted were almost incomprehensible, a stream of consciousness that revealed the total breakdown of her previous worldview. We believed intelligence was about complexity, about technological sophistication, about the ability to manipulate quantum states. But what if? What if intelligence is something else entirely? What if it's about seeing connections, about understanding the space between understanding? Her advisors were terrified. A ruling monarch experiencing doubt was more dangerous than any external threat. The Celestial Dominion's entire social structure was built on the absolute certainty of its leadership. Michael Chen, meanwhile, remained an enigma. No additional communication, no follow-up diplomatic mission, just the lingering impact of that single encounter. The Zorlak diplomatic corps began studying the incident. Their quantum-entangled researchers discovered something unprecedented. The pencil strokes Michael had created were not just communication. They were a form of living algorithm, a communication protocol that adapted in real time, finding resolution in the quantum uncertainty between different modes of perception. It is not that the human understood our communication, one Zorlak researcher noted. It is that he understood communication itself as a living, adaptive system. Xerax's personal transformation became a galactic phenomenon. Her public appearances changed. The absolute certainty that had defined her rule was replaced by a new quality, genuine curiosity. During one remarkable session, she appeared before the Galactic Conclave and did something unprecedented. She admitted uncertainty. Humanity, she communicated, her form no longer the rigid projection of power, but something more fluid, more uncertain, is not what we believed. They are something else entirely. The pencil had become a myth, a symbol of a communication revolution that no one fully understood. And Michael Chen. He had already moved on to the next impossible task, carrying nothing but a simple writing instrument and an understanding that true power resided in the spaces between what was known. 6 months after the quantum resonance chamber incident, the Galactic Conclave convened a special session that would rewrite every existing protocol of interstellar diplomacy. The venue was deliberate, not a high-tech space station, not a dimensional nexus, but a simple conference room on a neutral space habitat with windows that looked out onto the infinite darkness of space. Deliberately analog, deliberately human. Michael Chen was not officially invited, which meant, of course, that he was precisely where he needed to be. Queen Xerax arrived first, her form no longer the rigid, imposing projection of absolute power, but something more fluid, adaptive. Her sensory tendrils moved with a new quality that her fellow rulers found deeply unsettling: uncertainty. The representatives of 12 major galactic civilizations watched in collective bewilderment as the most powerful ruler in known space demonstrated something unprecedented: genuine intellectual humility. Our understanding of intelligence has been fundamentally incorrect. Xerax communicated, her multidimensional voice carrying a quality that was almost, though no one would dare say it, humble. The Silicon Collective's representative, a being of pure computational logic, responded first. Explanation required. paradigm shift detected. Comprehensive review necessary. What followed was not a traditional diplomatic negotiation. It was a deconstruction of every existing interstellar communication protocol. The Zorlak diplomatic corps had been studying the pencil strokes from the previous encounter. Their findings were revolutionary. What Michael Chen had created was not just a communication method, but a living algorithm of understanding, a way of finding resolution in the quantum uncertainty between different modes of perception. Humanity, one Zorlak researcher had concluded, does not communicate. It negotiates with reality itself. The new diplomatic framework emerged not through traditional debates, but through a process that defied conventional understanding. Representatives began to communicate in ways that blended mathematical precision with psychological insight, technological complexity with raw analog creativity. Territorial disputes that had existed for centuries found resolution. Economic barriers dissolved. The very concept of interstellar conflict began to be reimagined. And Michael Chen. He was nowhere and everywhere. A single sheet of paper circulated among the delegates. To most, it appeared blank. But to those who had learned to see differently, it was a complex communication protocol that rewrote the fundamental rules of galactic interaction. The pencil, that simple instrument, had become a legend, a symbol of a communication revolution that no one fully understood. Queen Xerax found herself at the center of a transformation she had never anticipated. The absolute certainty that had defined her rule was replaced by something far more powerful, the ability to genuinely learn. We were wrong, she communicated to the assembled delegates. The statement was simple, profound, unprecedented. The habitat's communication systems began to pulse with a new kind of energy. Not technological, not quantum, something else entirely. A living algorithm of understanding that seemed to breathe with the collective potential of different intelligences finding common ground. As the session concluded, one thing became clear. The rules of the universe had changed, and humanity, for the first time, was being recognized not as a species to be observed, but as a fundamental force of galactic transformation. The game was no longer about winning. It was about understanding. 10 years after the quantum resonance chamber incident, the universe had become unrecognizable. Michael Chen's pencil, now preserved in the Galactic Museum of Transformative Communication, was more than an artifact. It was a symbol of a fundamental shift in universal understanding. Humanity was no longer viewed as a species to be observed. They had become the architects of a new form of interstellar interaction. The transformation was subtle yet profound. New communication protocols emerged that defied traditional technological approaches. Universities across multiple civilizations began studying what became known as Chen methodology, a discipline that blended psychology, mathematics, quantum mechanics, and something entirely unique, human intuition. Queen Xerax, now a controversial figure in her own civilization, had become something of an academic and diplomatic renegade. Her research institute, dedicated to understanding alternative forms of intelligence, was simultaneously revered and feared. Intelligence is not about complexity, she would lecture to young diplomats from across the galaxy. It's about the capacity to find connection in the spaces between understanding. Her personal transformation became a case study in intellectual humility. The absolute ruler had become a perpetual student, continuously challenging the fundamental assumptions of her own civilization. The pencil itself became more than a historical artifact. Researchers discovered that the graphite lines Michael had drawn during the original encounter contained complex informational patterns that continued to reveal new insights decades later. It was as if the pencil had captured a form of living communication that transcended traditional informational storage. Diplomatic missions became less about technological superiority and more about genuine understanding. The celestial dominion's rigid hierarchical structures dissolved, replaced by more fluid, adaptive communication systems. The Zorlak diplomatic corps developed entire new branches of quantum communication theory based on Michael Chen's approach. Their researchers discovered that true communication was not about transmitting information, but about creating shared understanding in the quantum spaces between different perceptual frameworks. Humanity found itself in an unprecedented position, not as conquerors, not as a superior species, but as facilitators of a new kind of universal dialogue. Michael Chen himself remained an enigma. Occasional reports suggested he was working on something even more revolutionary. Some said he was developing communication protocols for species not yet discovered. Others claimed he was exploring forms of understanding that existed beyond current scientific comprehension. The pencil in the museum seemed to pulse with potential. Visitors would stand before it, sensing something ineffable, a reminder that the most profound revolutions often begin with the simplest of tools. During one of her final public lectures, Queen Orcs shared an insight that had become fundamental to the new galactic understanding. We believed intelligence was about power, about control, about technological sophistication. Humanity showed us that true intelligence is about something else entirely, the ability to find connection where none seemed possible. The universe had changed, not through conquest, not through technological superiority, but through a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to truly understand, and it all began with a pencil, and a human who understood that the most powerful weapon is not technology, but the capacity to see beyond what others believe is possible.